Thank you very much, Claudia, and thank you to you all for inviting me back. You've obviously not tired of my continual rumblings, so here we go. We'll have another go. Um, why am I talking about plant labeling and record keeping tonight? What's my deal? Um, I'm a trained plant taxonomist, so I'm the person who classifies plants and gives them their names. And so I've always been a little prone to wanting to keep names safe and to keep good records. Now, I have a pretty good memory for plant names, as you might expect, but it's more than just remembering the name. There's a lot more that goes with it. And my origin at Heronswood was actually in plant record keeping and databasing. So back in 2017, Dan Hinckley got in touch with me and told me that he was struggling to keep up with the labeling and databasing at Heronswood. And for a botanical garden, that's a big deal. He hired me part-time. I used to work 3 days a week, and all I did was labeling and keeping the records for Heronswood. And now I'm the director. God knows how that happened. Now I don't have time to do the record keeping and labeling, but I try and keep up with it as best as I can. And I spent several years gradually trying to get into the brains of all of the gardening staff at Heronswood how important record keeping and labeling is in a public botanical garden. But it's also important in your own private garden and in your own yard. So I'm going to talk my way through some of the elements of this. I hope we have plenty of time to discuss at the end because I suspect this will be a subject for which people will have lots of questions. So let's get going. Okay. So, why label plants? Well, obviously, as Claudia said, the most important, reminding gardeners of plant names. Having a label in there means that you don't have to rely on perhaps fallible memory. You can go and look at the plant and find the name and the details either attached or on a label in the ground below. Labels store, though, more than just the name. They can store other kind of useful information too. So, for example, if a plant was given to you by a special friend, it'd be good to know who gave you what plant and when. So you might include that information on a label. The labels on your plants can also highlight particular parts of your garden. So it may well be that you have an area in the garden that people often visit, and that's the area that you have all your labels because people specifically want to be able to know. Might be something like a vegetable garden where you want to know which herb is which herb so that you don't eat the wrong one. That's where labeling comes in. Garden visitors, not everybody has visitors to their garden, but you can just about guarantee that if you do, they will ask for the identity of that one plant that you don't remember. So have a label. And if you decide to take the next step in your garden record keeping and build yourself a database, whether that's a very simple one like I'm going to show you tonight or a more complex one, you need to have labels on your plants to connect them to that database. So plant labels can be made out of a lot of different materials, and I also noticed moving here to the Northwest that people had different names for them. So for me, the thing in the picture is a label, but some people call them tags, some people call them signs. But what I'm talking about when I'm talking about labels is the plastic or wooden item that is next to a plant or attached to a plant that has information on it. And the most common material that labels are made from is plastic. Now, it's worth differentiating between the labels you see on plants that you would buy in a retail setting as opposed to plants that are at home. So the picture here shows a retail label. This is the kind of label that comes with a plant when you buy it, usually stuck inside the edge of the pot. It usually has information about the plant, its name, maybe some background information, cultivation information. It also often will have the price on, as this one does. Now, the plastic labels that come free with plants are generally of a kind of plastic that doesn't keep long. So, when you put them out in your garden, within a few years, either they begin to fade or they become brittle, or both things. So I'll talk a little bit more about what to do with labels like this later in the talk. If you buy white plastic labels to use in your own garden, generally they're made of a different kind of plastic. They aren't the flexible white plastic you see here. They're often a stiffer material, and generally you write upon them. Those types of labels, though they are plastic, do tend to last much longer in the garden. Metal labels, of course, last a very long time, but of course, they tend to be more expensive than plastic. There are various different metals that can be used. Aluminum is quite common, copper. My favorite metal tags are aluminum tags that have soft metal on one side that allows you to take a pencil or a stylus and to scratch in the name onto the metal. The metal is soft so that you can write fairly easily the name. And because you're not using a pen or any kind of ink or any material like that, the name can't fade. It lasts for a very long time. And those style of metal labels, you can buy them on from Amazon and from a whole range of other places, and they are good and long lasting. Copper labels are much more appealing to the eye, but copper is expensive, and so having lots of copper labels is usually beyond the budgets of many gardeners. Today, you can also get a lot of good wood and bamboo labels. Again, being made out of wood or bamboo, they don't last for a long time. And so they're much better off used in instances where you might just need short-term labeling. So, for example, labeling the rows in your vegetable plot, the label likely will only have to last for one growing season and then it'll be taken out. Wooden or bamboo labels, when coming into contact with earth, rapidly begin to break down. So they're a good temporary label, but not good for long-term naming. Engraved labels are probably the most fancy, the most exclusive type. And when I say engraved, the most common form of this would be a black plastic label that is engraved on the surface to reveal the white underside. So the black, you end up with a black surface with white text. They're the kind of labels that you find most often in botanical gardens. They're often small rectangles and they'll often have the name of the plant, maybe in Latin and in English, and other details too. Labels like that are available to purchase. There are companies that you can buy them from online, but they are expensive. And so generally that kind of more elaborate labeling tends to be restricted to botanical gardens that can afford to do labels like that or that have their own machine to produce those labels because the machines that do the engraving are very, very expensive. Last but not least, an old favorite of mine from old days is recycled labels. So that's when you take a material that isn't designed to be a label and you turn it into one. I've used yogurt containers, milk bottles, all sorts of things, usually plastic, that you can cut into pieces. Once you've cut it and you've cleaned it, you can either punch a hole in it to make it a hanging label, or you can give it a pointed end so that you can push it into the ground. Labels like this are, of course, free, and it's at least a way of reusing some of the huge quantities of plastic that most of us find in our lives. Now, just as important as the material that the label is made of is the way in which you record information on that label. And the standard for pretty much all labels is pencils. If you have those little white plastic labels that have a slightly rough texture to them, they are perfectly designed to be written on with a pencil. And pencil writing, because it's graphite, because it is not ink, pencil writing lasts for a very long time. It's not uncommon at Heronswood for us to find old blue plastic labels that were from the original Hinckley collections back in the 1980s and 90s, and often they are written on with pencil, and with care, you can still read what that pencil says. So pencil is a really good, long-lasting way to write by hand on plastic labels. Of course, these days you're more often to have a marker pen, something like a Sharpie. They can work as well. They're easy to read on a white plastic label. It's easy to read a dark colored Sharpie. Persistence, though, is not quite as good. It varies depending on the type of pen that you're using. Some can last maybe 6 months, but invariably they start to fade. And if they're in full sunlight, then they tend to fade even faster. So generally, marker pens are only used again for temporary labeling, like labeling seed trays in your greenhouse. Scratching, of course, gives you a slightly longer lasting option. And as I described earlier with some metal labels, that is that using a stylus and scratching or engraving deeply is the way in which you write upon them. You can scratch plastic labels too, but it can be difficult to read them afterwards. But of course, scratched marks will last longer. We've talked a little bit about engraving. I wish there were easier ways for regular gardeners to produce engraved labels, but so far nobody has created a device that can do it on a small scale for our use. But printing, well, there's lots of different ways to print a label. And printing has a few advantages in terms of, well, it's easier and it allows you to have different formats of text. You could have italics, you can have bold, you can have symbols and other notations that you wouldn't really be able to write out by hand. The thing is with printing, though, is it really depends on the type of label that you're printing. And if you look at this picture of the label on the left, this is one of Heronswood's standard labels. You can see the label itself is a transparent acrylic plastic. It's about 8 inches long by about 3/4 of an inch wide. Um, it's quite a thick plastic. They're fairly robust. About the only thing that breaks them is if you stand on them directly from above, which happens. But the text on the label, we don't do that by hand. We do it by printing. And in this case, it is a Brother label printer. And what it does is it prints out a kind of spool of a plastic label, and you peel off the back and you stick it on to the rigid label. Being a printable thing makes it a lot easier for us because we can put a lot more text on there. It takes a lot less time to do it, and also it's much easier for visitors to the garden to read. The sticky label itself is also made of plastic and is transparent, so it's a perfect system for us. We found labels like this last at least 5 years, and in general, we've been using them for 8 or 9 years, but Heronswood, at least much of Heronswood, is in full shade, and so these labels don't necessarily get exposed to really strong sunlight. But so far, our experience has been that these have been very long lasting. Now, this is what the tapes look like. So, our label printer is a desktop printer. It plugs into a desktop computer, and you load it with these tapes. They look like an old-fashioned cassette tape, but with only one whirl to spool. They're relatively cheap. You can buy them easily from a wide variety of sources, and you can get different colors. This one is a white label with black text. We have transparent labels with black text, and we readily replace these tapes in the printer, and then we use a program on the desktop computer to print out the label. And it's just a piece of software that comes with the label maker when you buy it. So this is something that is accessible, but a little bit expensive for most gardeners' use. But if you feel like you would be able to use these labels in other parts of your life, then it might be something worth investing in. So what do you put on the label when you create it? Well, the space on most labels is limited, so you've got to be really aware of putting on the information that for you is the most important. Now, from our perspective at the garden, the most important thing we put on is a database number. If you have a database, then you must have a number on there that will allow you to connect your plant on the ground with your information in your database. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further down in this talk. But for us, that number is crucial. Of course, for most home gardeners, the most important piece of information we put on a label would be the name. Now, if you choose, it can be the Latin name of the plant, it can be the English name of the plant, it can be any language name of the plant, as long as it's the name that you need to remember. And if there's room, you can always put multiple names, but in general, there's only really room for one full name. And of course, being a botanical garden in general, we start with the Latin name. Um, if we had the more elaborate black and white garden labels that are more common in larger botanical gardens. I think our preference would be to have both the Latin name, the English name, and the Clallam name. Because, of course, Heronswood is owned and operated by the Port Gamble Clallam tribe. And increasingly, we are trying to use Clallam language as much as we can. Although, in fairness, a lot of plants, particularly those that don't occur in this part of the world naturally, they don't have names in the Clallam language. But it would be useful to be able to put that third language onto labels, at least for our native plants. Other information you might put on your label, date of purchase or date of acquisition, so that you remember how long you've had the plant. Or if the plant was gifted to you, then you might put on the person that gave it to you or where you purchased it. It could be quite useful to know where you got your plant in the past. That way, if you need to go back and get more, or if you want to take the plant back, or if you want more information, then you have the ability to go and locate that plant again. Um, If it's edible plants, it might be that you write down some of their uses on the plant. But in general, the label doesn't have a lot of room. So you're limited to those key things. And for me, database number, plant's name, generally in Latin, because that's how my brain works. They're the most important things. Now, whilst most labels, when we're talking about labels, are ones that stick into the soil, they're usually got a pointed end to go into the ground. There are other kinds of labels that are available for plants too. Tree and shrub labels are generally ones that have some kind of cordage or string or chain on them that allows you to hang the label on the plant. Now, if you imagine a large tree, the likelihood is having a little label stuck in near the base of the tree, it would be quite hard to find. But having a label hanging either on the trunk or on one of the major branches is a little bit easier. So we've adapted our labels at Heronswood for shrub use. You can see here on this rose, we've just drilled a small hole in the end of one of our standard labels, and we've tied it on there with some very loose wire. The wire is attached in such a way so that it can expand as the tree's trunk gets wider. But any label that you attach around a stem or trunk, you are going to have to periodically revisit that label to make sure that it's not cutting into the stem. It's so, so important to make sure that they don't cut into the stem because you can cause significant damage to your plant. We don't have a lot of tree labels at Heronswood, so thankfully it's not something that we have to do on a very regular basis. Another option is to have labels that have QR or barcodes on them. So this label here I found at a botanical garden in North Carolina, and I was really impressed with its QR code. That's the funny square you can see at the bottom. By scanning that with your cell phone, you can then access the garden's database and information about that individual plant. So that's super high tech, or at least as far as Heronswood is concerned, but it's a really useful and nice feature in that it allows members of the public to interact with the plant that's in front of them. Potentially, when they scan that, they can have a conversation with the plant. They can find out information where the plant's from, how long it's been planted. The world is your oyster. You could have that little QR code could link to any piece of information or any web page you wanted it to. So a fascinating development. You don't see this in many gardens and not even in many public botanical gardens. This is kind of, in my mind at least, a little futuristic. It really isn't futuristic in technological terms, but it takes a while for botanical gardens to catch up. Um, Another kind of label you might use in the garden is the changeable label. Now, we tend to think that most of our labels will be there for the duration of the plant's life, but sometimes you might just want to be able to switch out a label. And the design of this one allows you for you to take out that little white card that has all the information on it and replace it down the line. This plant was in a trial bed, so it had been planted out in order to test its value in a garden setting, and so the owners of this particular test bed need to be able to switch out labels on a regular basis as they change the plants that are on trial. So this is a fun way of getting to reuse labels and not have to always not have to buy new insert labels every time. So that metal stand that you can see is permanent and expensive, but the little white card can be replaced on a regular basis. Now, if you're gonna have a plant with a label, then generally you want to put the right name on it. And that's a bit of a minefield. I mean, I could probably have spent the entirety of this lecture today just talking about checking names and why names change. And I know the last time I spoke to you about botanical Latin, I kind of went into that a little bit, but here's a few websites that I particularly recommend, and I know that they're going to get listed. I think in the chat for you to see links to these websites. If you're going to put a label on a plant, you may as well put the right one. Here's a few ways in which you can check the current name of your plant. So the first one that I always recommend is Plants of the World Online, which is a website created by the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. I am a little biased. I used to work at Kew. That's where I did my PhD. So I have connections there, but it is a very, very easy to use website. You simply go to the page, type in the name, and it has predictive text. So as you're typing, it will suggest names that you might want to choose, which helps you with things like spelling, because not everybody can spell Latin names readily. Once you've typed it in or you've selected from their list, you just click on enter, and what it does is it brings up this page that you can see here. So here we have Hydrangea febrifuga. It says below, this species is accepted. So it's telling you that this is the name that is currently accepted, at least by this website. It has more information there. It tells you where they come from geographically. It shows you a map there of the different countries in which this plant naturally occurs. Other information like the plant family. So Hydrangeaceae is written there at the top, so you know which family it's in. First published in Taxon 64. So if you ever wanted to go and find the original description of this plant, that's where it would be. So it's lots of useful information. And if you type in a name that is not a currently recognized name, it will tell you what the current name is for that plant. So very, very useful. But it is British based, and classifications vary depending on people. A good one here in the US is the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder. And the good thing about that one is that it does include a lot of cultivational information, whereas this one at Kew really is purely about the name. That's all it's really telling you, where the plant is and what its correct name is. The Missouri website gives you a lot more information about how to cultivate the plant, although a lot of the time that information is based on folks gardening in Missouri, and obviously they have a very different climate from what we have out here. Um, the last but not least reference on my list is from the Royal Horticultural Society, and I put this one here because I needed to cover cultivars. What's a cultivar? Well, if you look at a plant Latin name, and at the end of that name, it has an English word with abbreviations around it, that is the cultivar. And cultivars are really important in horticultural taxonomy. So if you're looking at plants that grow in gardens, cultivars are really important. And actually, cultivar means cultivated variety. Lots of the plants that we grow in our gardens are cultivars. In some cases, almost all. So almost all roses, almost all clematis, almost all bearded irises that we grow are cultivars. They are forms that have been selected by human beings because they have a particularly good set of characteristics. Websites like the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, they just don't look at things like cultivars. They're just looking at wild species that you can find out in nature. The RHS's plant search website does allow you to search for cultivars. So if you're looking at a garden plant and it has a cultivar name, you won't be able to find it on Kew, but you will be able to find it at the RHS and find out if that is the correct current name for that particular plant. Now, again, the RHS obviously is based in England, and so it has an English bias. And every now and again, you'll find there's a plant that's here in the United States that isn't being cultivated in England, and so therefore it's not in their database. But it doesn't happen all that often, and there isn't currently a good database of all cultivated plants here in the United States. So this one back in England is about the best that we can do, but it does give you a way of checking cultivar names and plants before you put them on the label. Now, this is what a Heronswood label looks like, and I thought it would be interesting for you to see what bits of information we choose to put on our labels, how we prioritize. So you'll see the first part there is the plant's name, and it's the Latin name. Now, we don't put it in italics or anything. It's really a label. It's designed to be easily read, and so having it in big, bold, thick text is the way in which people can see it easily. We're often asked by visitors, why do you have transparent labels? There is a reason for that. Some people love them and some people hate them. The people who love them for the reason that we have them, and that is they're not too hot, they're not too obvious in the garden. And Heronswood has almost 9,000 different species growing in it. Every one of them should have a label on it. It would make the garden not feel like a garden because all you would see is a sea of black plastic if we had traditional botanical garden labels. Way back at the start of Heronswood, Dan knew that that wasn't something he wanted. He always wanted Heronswood to look good. And so he looked for labeling options that would be more subtle, less obvious when you're enjoying the landscape. So being transparent like this means they blend in a lot better. But it does have the consequence that they can be hard to read or hard to find. And that will be the other thing that the public will sometimes complain about is we can't see your labels because they're transparent. So there is a reason why we have it, and we find that this is a good middle ground for us. So the plant name there, Ardisiaspa. The next piece of text is the collection number, and the collection number refers to where the plant came from in the world and when it was collected. So you can see here we have DJHAP 18051. So DJH is the initials of Dan Hinckley, Daniel John Hinckley, and generally plant collection numbers usually start with the name of the person who collected it. AP in this case stands for Arunachal Pradesh, which is one of the states of India. So DJHP were all of Dan's collections from that particular part of India. The number is made up of two parts. So the 1-8 stands for 2018. So Dan would have collected this plant in 2018. And the 051 means that this was the 51st plant he collected on that trip in 2018. So collected by Daniel J. Hinckley in Arunachal Pradesh in 2018, and it was the 51st plant to be collected on that trip. The last part of our labeling is our database number, and our database numbers always begin with the letters PL. Nobody's actually told me what PL stands for, but they always start with PL. They are always a string of 8 numbers, always starting with 1. I mean, at some point, I suppose we might tick over to a 2, but the number there is searchable for us, and it's searchable in our plant database. And when I'm out in the garden, this is the thing I love about our database. So our database is on my phone. So here it is. All I can do is I can type in this number, and it will bring up all the records of this plant in the garden so I can check them. I can take photos of the plant and upload them to this database. It brings a lot of utility to this system. So Heronswood's labels, transparent acrylic plastic, they're not commercially available. The way we have them is we have a relationship with a plastic producer, and what they do is they cut sheets of plastic up into the size that we require. We have two different sizes. One is 10 inches by 3/4 of an inch, and then we have another one half the size, which is 5 inches by 3/8 of an inch. Why do we have two sizes? Well, this big label you see in front of you, the 10-inch one, that's the standard. We've been using those for the past 10 plus years. But in recent years, we added a couple of features to the garden that required slightly different labeling. One was our rock garden. And these huge, big 10-inch labels are just too big for a rock garden. It's really hard to push them down into the crevices in between the rocks. And if you can get them in there, they often fall out because they're not gripped. So instead, we made a half-size label. We also had to buy tape printers that were slightly smaller, and that's how we label the plants in our rock garden. They are still transparent, though. They look just like this, but half the size. Now, when visitors come and visit Heronswood, I'm sure many of you have. If you haven't, then hopefully we'll see you again this year. People wandering around the garden will see these signs here that you see on the left, G01. These are a lot more obvious than our transparent plastic labels, but we don't have as many of these. These are our bed labels. So every single bed in the garden has its own label and its own number, and that number is used in our database. So for every plant, we know exactly which bed that plant is in. And for that system to work, we need to have labels on the beds so that we can find the bed when we need them. Now, my brain being what it is, most of these I already have in my memory. And if you look on the picture on the right, that's what the wall of my office looks like. That's our map. And it's very, we say in England, Heath Robinson. It's very put together. The original map was a drawing made by Dan Hinckley's husband, Robert. Over the years, as we've added garden to the original Heronswood, we've had to add additional maps. You can see them stuck around, and you'll maybe able to see too on each of these beds there will be some kind of code number. Now, the original beds at Heronswood were just numbered, starting from 001, which is at the far north of Heronswood, all the way to our furthest down bed, which is 107. So 107 beds. Well, actually, there aren't 107. Some of the numbers Dan didn't use. So we have some spare numbers floating about that we can use in future should we need. When we started adding new gardens at Heronswood, though, rather than trying to add on to that series that will get higher and higher and higher, we started some new series. So we have a series of numbers beginning with R. So, for example, any plant in our Renaissance garden will be in an R bed. So we have R01 to, I think, R22. We have G, and G stands for the rock garden. I thought R obviously was already taken for Renaissance, so I went for G for geology. So G01, as you see in this picture, that's the first part of the rock garden that we ever built. And at the moment, we go up to G09. And then we have T for our Travelers and Skull and Connections gardens. And I think at the moment we are up to T24. But the good thing about those extra number series is that they can allow for expansion. All of them can at least go up to 99, which means we've got plenty more beds to go in the future. Here's a closer look at that slightly crazy map. It all makes sense to me, maybe not quite so much to some of my staff. It's kind of like the inner workings of my brain. And when I'm walking around the garden, this is what I'm seeing in my head. These beds have a lot of different names. At different times in the past, Dan gave them different kind of colloquial names, usually names based on what the particularly impressive plant in that bed was. So we have an Eminopterus bed, we have a Schefflera bed, um, we have a pump house bed because that's where the well housing was. While some of these names have been used on and off, they weren't used routinely, and so we've ended up with multiple names for multiple beds. But there's only one number. Each bed has one number. So for me, the numbers are real important. And mapping brings us round to databasing. Now, a database is an electronic record of all the things that you have in your garden, and it has a few benefits over just plain simple labeling. Firstly, it gives you the opportunity to share information with others. So if you have a list of all the things that are in your garden and somebody asks you what you're growing, you can share it with them easily by email or by phone. In some cases, it also allows you to carry that information around with you. Now, Heronswood's current database, as I showed you, can be used as an app on our phone. So that means I can walk around the garden and see everything I want. Our previous database was not like that, and I could only look at it on my laptop and only if I had Wi-Fi. And that meant it made it a little bit more tricky. It meant I had to go out in the garden and look at something, come back to my laptop, and then go outside again. That wasn't ideal, and the flexibility of having something based in an app is really appealing. Your database gives you a level of security. Now, plant labels outside can be damaged, they can be bleached by the sun, they can be removed by wildlife or pets, they can be trampled on, pushed into the ground, mulched over. Labels get taken out by members of the public. Would you believe people actually steal labels in botanical gardens? Labels can disappear. And so having a electronic record gives you a backup for when that label disappears, if it disappears. It's also a lot quicker to update. Updating your physical labels takes a really long time. So if a plant's name changes, it's much more cumbersome to change the name on the label as opposed to changing it in the database. Having a database too gives you a way of organizing photos. So if you take a lot of photos of the plants in your garden, it's a way of connecting the photo to the name, to the actual plant in the ground. And on the left here, you can see a little image from our database. This is our large Chilean flame tree in our perennial borders. And you can see at the top there, that big PL number, that is the number that identifies this plant in our system. Our database allows us to hold photos. So for every individual plant in the garden, we can have up to 4 images. And that's really useful, even not for a few different reasons. It gives us information about when things are happening. So, for example, this every photo in the database has a date that it was uploaded, and so you can see, well, this plant was flowering on that date. We also always store photos of a picture of the plant taken from a distance. And we do that so that we can easily find the plant again in future. Because sometimes when you're trying to find a plant in a bed, you can look at that photo and you can see from it, oh, well, there's an irrigation head there, there's a distinctive rock there, there's a particular tree there. That really helps you narrow down where the plant is. So the photography element of it is super important. And it's the great thing about having the app on our phone. It means I can directly upload photos from my phone onto the app. Now, the vast majority of databases designed for storing plant information are not widely available to the public. So, what do you do? I've got a few what I like to call low-tech database solutions here. And actually, the first one, the Ziploc filing system, it's a system of my own. It's what I use at home. So I spend all my days at Heronswood having all this information about plants in the database. And to be honest, when I get home, I just don't want to be doing that. That's work. So at home, I've gone for a much more low-tech approach, and it involves Ziploc bags or any sealable bag. For each bed in my yard, I have a separate Ziploc bag. And on the front of the Ziploc bag, I've written on a Sharpie the name of that bed, the Christmas border, the central bed, houseplants, that kind of thing. I then have a box and I have all the bags in that box. Whenever I buy a plant or whenever I'm given a plant, I take the plastic label that comes with that plant, I take it out. I don't want to put it outside. I always think plastic labels from plants that you get from plants that you buy are really ugly in a garden. And also, they don't last for very long. They fade or they become brittle. So as soon as I get that plant planted, I take that label out and I put it in the respective bag, the one for the bed that it's in. Now, that system works pretty well until you move something or something dies. And so, what I do is every Christmas, I find a nice quiet day, maybe a snowy one when I want to be inside in the warm. I get the box out, I turn on some Christmas music, and I go through each bag and I toss out any labels that have for plants that have died. And if any of the plants have been moved, maybe I've dug it up and moved it to another bed, I then take the label out of one bag and put it into the correct bag. So once a year, I update my database, and it's very, very simple. I keep it in a box in my garden shed. It's my database, and I know if I need to know the name of a plant in the garden, and I often do because I don't always remember them. I can go back, find the respective bag, and in there will be that label with the full name. And that's really, really useful and doesn't require an awful lot of effort. Only that once a year update. Another thing you can do if you don't want to have labels cluttering your space, and let's face it, there's too much plastic in all our lives. What about taking photos of your plant labels? Most plastic plant labels that you get from a nursery, you could take photos of them, and it's much easier to store photos on your phone than it is to store labels in a bag in your home. This thing can hold millions of photos. Another way in which I keep data about my plants in the garden is using the Notes app. Now, most cell phones, most modern cell phones will have some kind of simple note-taking app. On iPhones, it's called Notes, but there are other names for it in different phones. Um, Consider keeping a list of your plants on your Notes app. One of the ways you might do it is by adapting my Ziploc system. Have a different individual note for each bed in your garden. And when you buy a plant and you plant it, make sure you take that label and you type in the name into the respective page in your Notes app. If the plant was something you grew from seed, make sure you take the name from the seed packet before you throw it out. And if the plant was given to you by somebody, then make sure you note down from them what the name was. And you don't just have to note the name, you could note where you put the plant, whereabouts it sits in the border, what date you collected it, who gave it to you, how much you paid for it. All of this information could be easily stored in your Notes app on your phone. Now, kind of the most complicated way of doing it, which is a very simple way that doesn't require any kind of specialist database, is to use something like Excel or Google Sheets. These are very easy to use, widely available databasing tools that would allow you to store information. Heronswood's original database was basically an Excel spreadsheet. So we've come on in time, but we started with a very simple system. And all we had was one spreadsheet, and it had a series of columns. The first one was the plant's name, but it also included columns like bed number, date of acquisition, source, where the plant came from, where it was planted in the garden. You can make it as complex or as simple as you want. And these days, Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets are generally available on your phone too, which means that you can then access that information in your garden if you have some signal. Databasing doesn't have to be complicated and doesn't have to utilize these more complex, specially designed botanical garden softwares. Now, one thing that is available very widely for people to use is ways of storing your photos. And I don't know about you, but my phone is literally chock full of plants. You go into my phone and look on the photos section, it's page upon page upon page of plant pictures. And pictures have a value as a record. And it's really a useful way of containing information about your garden. Now, You could use the more complex way of doing this. In my case, I'm a big fan of Flickr. I take photos on my phone and then I upload them onto Flickr. This is what you can see on the right. This is what Flickr looks like on a phone. These are all photos that I took, and it shows you where they are. It shows you the date on which they were uploaded, and it has the ability for you to sort them into albums. That's super useful because you could make albums for your garden. You could have an album for each different bed or each different area of your garden. When you buy a plant, you could take a photo of it, you could take a photo of the label, upload it onto Flickr, and stick it in the correct album. All done from the touch of your phone. These sites like Flickr, Google Photos, Amazon Photos, they're all searchable. So it allows you to search for particular plants. And you can also, in some cases, add tags. So you could tag each plant that is in the same bed. That way you could pull together a show of all the plants from one area. When you utilize something like Flickr, it has a world map function. So what it does is it can provide you a map and you can search through that map and find where photos were taken. So if you have a big yard, then it might give you the ability to show a map of where the plants are in your garden. I find, again, this is useful. If you take photos on your phone and your phone has a little bit of signal, then it records the geographical location in which the photo was taken. When you go into your phone, into the Photos app, one of the options there is for maps. Go and look at the map, and there you have a geographical representation of all the photos that you've ever taken. Super useful. Because there are so many plant photos on my phone, it can be a little laborsome scrolling through them. And actually, the search function on an iPhone's Apple on the Photos thing is pretty poor. I hope they will make it better, but I can't search for a plant name on there. It won't find anything. I could search for the word flower and get 1,400 images to look through, but the map function is useful. If I go in and look at the map, I think, oh, I'm looking for a picture I took of a hibiscus in Hawaii. Well, I can scroll over to Hawaii and just look through the photos I took in Hawaii, which is going to really cut down on the number of photos that I have to look for. So some of these inbuilt features of our phones, and unfortunately, most of us have a phone in our pockets at most of the time, can be really useful for gardeners if they're looking to record information about the plants in their garden. And it means you don't have to worry about paper or notes or plastic bags or labels or any of that kind of thing. It gives you a mobile way of recording information about your garden. Now, I hoped to jump online and find some good apps that would do some of this stuff. You'd think there would be, but so far I've yet to find one. There are apps that will help you identify plants. There's one here on the left. They're varying in their abilities. There are none that I hugely like. I found that Google image search is getting better, but it can still really lead you astray. The problem is for a lot of these apps is not so much that they can't identify images, but the quality of the image has to be really good. And a lot of plants, you need to be able to see specific features about them in order to identify which species they are. And that's the thing that often fails with these online apps. There are apps that teach you about plant care. There are apps that teach you about garden design. There are some really good wildflower and native plant ID apps. I really like the we have one here in Washington State that's just called Washington WA Flowers. It's really good. I can use that when I'm out in the field. I don't need an internet connection for it to work. Um, there are also citizen science apps like iNaturalist. That's a really good way of both recording information about plants that you see and also trying to work out what the plant you're looking at is. But there aren't really any currently available apps that record information about plants and gardens. There are none that are designed for that purpose. There are databasing apps that can database anything that you might choose to database, but there aren't any that are designed specifically for plants. I guess there just aren't enough of us asking for them yet. So I talked about geolocating. This little picture you can see on the right is from my phone. It shows you what I see when I look at the mapping ability in photos. So you can see where I've taken photos across the country. And when you zoom in, those boxes split apart, so you get even more detail about where the pictures were taken. Um, This can be useful if you're trying to locate plants within your garden. And that's one of the most important things that a database does, is tells you where the plant is. So you can use the geolocated images to try and track down your plant. It's other ways of mapping your plants in your garden. Well, you can take photos of them in situ. So what you might do is once you've planted a plant, you might step back and take a photo of it that shows you the whole landscape and where the plant is in it. Storing that photo means you'll be able to find that plant in the future. You might write down descriptions of where you've planted that plant, or you might use a GPS device to get the actual GPS coordinates for where that plant is. Now, that's beyond what most gardeners are probably going to want to do, but finding a plant can be surprisingly challenging, particularly after a few years. If you're looking for it in the winter, maybe when it doesn't have any leaves, being able to find something is all about having geographical information. Now, for most gardeners, mapping their plants is going to look something like this. And this is a map of Heronswood's Traveller's Garden and Skull and Connections Garden. You can see art was not my strong point, but it just has to be functional. You'll see each of these beds has a T number on it. I've tried to include any important physical features like the plaza in the middle. On the right, top right there, you can see there's a creek and a bridge. But otherwise, all you can see are the beds and the paths or trails that surround those beds. Once you've got a map like this, you can then record information without having to draw everything on the map. Now, drawing everything on the map is probably the most straightforward way of doing things. But after a while, a plant dies, you have to rub it out, you have to edit it all the time. It's not very changeable. So what we originally did at Heronswood was we had maps like this. We created them so that each bed had a number, and then we kept information in a spreadsheet of where each plant was by listing the bed number that it was in. If you're trying to draw a picture of your garden and create these bed numbers, then a really useful tip is to go onto a scalable mapping program like Google Maps. Lots and lots of different mapping things. Mapping websites that utilize satellite imagery, they give you a really good scale. So one of the things you can do is you can take look at your garden on Google Earth, look at the satellite image of it from above, and then save that image either by downloading it as a PDF or taking a screenshot of that image and then printing it out. That then gives you a scale. You can then get tracing paper, put it over that, and draw out your map so that it's roughly to scale. And scale isn't necessarily important for finding your plants, but for having an accurate map, it's really, really useful. What I did in the past was I would take a map like this and I would mount it on a cork pin board, and then I could use push pins to connect the map to various bits of information. I could use post-it notes to write down the names of the plants, and I could even add photographs taken on my camera or on my phone to reference these plants. So there are lots and lots of ways in which you can record information about the plants in your garden beyond the label. You can record them digitally, you can record them physically, you can record them in a geographical sense too, and all of that information really helps you keep track of what you have in your garden. Now, I said I would finish a little bit earlier. I didn't want to dazzle you so far with so many things that you didn't get a chance to ask questions. And so hopefully, Claudia, etc., are there and available to ask questions. I see looks like there are some questions in the chat. Bring them forward.
Well, I one of my questions was you said that there's nothing like the Royal Hort database in the
Mhm.
US.
Mhm.
Um, why is that? Do we not care here in the US?
No, I think it's just, your country, well, my country now, I'm a US citizen, it's so much bigger. The way that the RHS creates their database is they ask nurseries to send them in lists of plants that they have in their nursery. That's what makes up the basis of the RHS database, is those lists from nurseries. You can imagine for a country this size that has this diverse a geography, the size of that would be 10 times, 100 times bigger than what the RHS has to deal with.
Mm.
But also, you don't generally have here national level horticultural organizations. There are a few. There's the American Horticultural Society, but because you're geographically so varied, it doesn't make sense to have an American institution. Instead, your institutions tend to be local. So they're in the Northwest, or they're in the state, or they're in your county, because in that area, you've got very similar climate, very similar habitats. And so the kinds of plants that you can grow will be rather similar. It makes no sense for something that works in the Southeast to be given to us in the Northwest. They don't always work. So I suspect not having that one overarching horticultural organization is another reason why you don't have this national list that would apply. And it's a big old deal doing it. And I suspect that there aren't any nation level organizations here in the US that are capable of doing something like that. Whereas, of course, Britain's a lot smaller. And so they're only dealing with a much smaller pool of potential plants that they have to keep in a list.
Another one is how often do you curate your photos? So here you are, uh, you've taken these photos, even a small-ish garden, you take these photos, or you're out there taking photos of your neighbor's plants or things you're interested in, and you do end up with loads and loads of uh, photos. Um, how often do you go through every evening or and throw out the ones you don't want?
Well, it's probably one of those things that I probably don't do it often enough, and I'm sure everybody will be like that. Um, I take photos in two different ways, one on my phone and
Mhm.
one using an actual camera. And the ones I take with an actual camera are of better quality. It's not just that the image is better, but I have a higher pixel count. So the photo is more useful to me in the future in that I can, if I wanted to print it, I could print it. If I want to use it in one of these presentations, it's a better image. Those photos I'm very strict about. Whenever I take them, as soon as I get home, I pull out that memory card, I upload them onto my laptop, and I upload them onto Flickr. So that for me is what Flickr is for. It's so that I can manage my collection of important photos. And putting in the data is something that you need to do in order to make them searchable and useful.
Mhm.
And the trick is if you leave that too long, you'll start to forget. So when I'm out photographing, say I go and visit a botanical garden, what I'll do is I'll go around and take photos of everything that interests me, or often everything that's flowering. But I always take a photo of the label in the botanical garden at the same time. So I'll take the label photo first, then I'll take my multiple photos of that plant. Then when I get home and I'll upload them all, I don't keep that photo of the label, but I've got it for when I'm labeling my photos. So I go through all the photos and label each one with the name of the plant that I've got from that photo label. And I also add into the extra details for the photo where the photo was taken, the date, although usually the camera already knows the date it was taken. I add all that into the supplementary details that come with the photo. So for those photos, I put in effort to do it, and I try and do it as soon as I take them. With the photos on my phone, I'm a lot more slack. I who has time to be sorting? And maybe two or three times a year I'll go through and chuck out some things that weren't worth keeping. But I still every now and again will find a photo that was taken when I accidentally dropped my phone. So even I am not perfect at it. And it's hard to annotate photos in an iPhone. It's hard to add data to them. But if you were doing something like, for example, using the notes facility on your phone and attaching the photo to the note, then that would be a way in which you could curate specific photos if you need to. I will occasionally upload a photo from my phone onto Flickr if it was of something rare. And, occasionally I'll be caught without my camera, but I generally always have my phone. So if I get a photo that I think is going to be valuable to me in the future and I took it on my phone, I will upload it to Flickr. And actually, Flickr is very well designed to allow you to upload photos from your phone. You don't have to go through a laptop. You can upload them directly to Flickr. So
Mhm.
that's useful for me and that's what works for me. But there are so many options when it comes to curating collections of photos. Unlike there being almost no options for how to curate information from your garden electronically. With photos, you've got loads of options, which is why it's
Mhm.
a good way of storing garden information because you've got plenty of options in terms of what software that you can use. And there are free softwares, there are softwares that you can pay for. If you're a photographer, then you're probably already using a software that allows you to store your photos and organize them. If you're not, then there are free options available, and that way I think for a lot of us, we're instinctively visual people, and having records that are pictures just works better for people. It connects you in a way that text does not. And so storing photos is a much more convenient way of storing information about plants. And I'd rather have a photo of a plastic label than have to keep the actual plastic label.
Fair enough. Um, have you used any AI in the management of the database at Heronswood, or are
No,
you not there yet?
no, we are not. AI definitely has the potential to revolutionize databasing of plant data information, but we haven't really cracked how to best make that work for us. And the problem with AI for plant records is the same problem that AI has for everything. It doesn't have legs. It's great to think, oh well, AI can, do all this computer work. But when your baby needs to be burped or when you need to pick up after your dog, AI can't do that because it can't be physical. Robotics haven't kept up with AI. And the same is true with plant records. Whilst AI could facilitate the storage of record information about plants, in the end, it still can't tell you if that plant is still alive in the garden. You still have to take that database, go out to the garden and look for it. And that'll almost, at least in my lifetime, will always be the case, or at least I hope so, because that means job security for me. A database is only as useful as the reality that it's reflecting on the
Mhm.
ground. And if the what's happening in the garden is not cannot be managed by AI. So I'm sure there are very busy IT people finding ways to incorporate AI into databasing solutions to make them more effective. Probably not for botanical gardens because none of us have enough money for that. But for lots of other things that down the line could then be modified to be used for botanical gardens. But in the end, you still need your electronic database to connect to the physical garden because that's where the plants are. And let's face it, that's the thing that's most important for all of us, right?
And that's where the photos come in. You mentioned a identification resource for Washington. Someone didn't catch that. Do you
Okay.
remember the name of that?
Yeah, I'm just playing up on my phone. It's called WA Flowers. Um,
Washington.
and that's what it looks like. Let me in on the icon for the app, it's WA Flowers. In the actual app, it's called Washington Wildflowers. You can download it from anywhere you download apps, and I believe it was free. I don't think it was one that you had to pay for. Most states now will have a some kind of wildflower app. Sometimes they go beyond one state. Oregon has the really excellent Oregon Flora, but I don't know that it has an app version yet. I think it's just web-based, but it is very, very good. It has predictive text it has great mapping. So if you're ever trying to find plants in Oregon, then Oregon Flora is really wonderful. But the good thing about an app, as opposed to a website, of course, is that you don't need to be connected to the internet for you to be able to use it. And if you're out hiking at Mount Rainier, then you're not going to have Wi-Fi. So it's good to have something as a little backup. And these days, I'm just too lazy to carry around one of the big, thick books that tells you everything about what plants you might find. So, but the great thing is now, if you're hiking and you don't know what a plant is, you can take a really good photo or series of photos, and then you can have a go with the old Google image search, and maybe it will get you there.
Good. So we're taking our phones instead of our Oregon Flora Volume 1 and 2.
It kind of
Um,
it kind of makes me feel so one of the problems that a lot of botanical gardens have is theft of labels. You wouldn't think it would be a thing, but it is. But partly that's because people see the label, they think, oh, that's a plant I like. How am I going to remember what it is? They take the label so that they can then go and find the plant down the line. But now almost everybody has a phone. There's no need for you to take a label. All you need to do is snap a photo of the phone of the label and you're good to go and we're all happy.
Even if one of us was to run out and get one of those brother labeling systems, how long do those last in you've had them in your garden for a while?
We've been using them for 10 years. The
Oh,
tricky thing is with labels is we're not systematically putting them out in different weather conditions and then watching how long they last.
mm.
If it was in full sun, in a dry environment, it would probably last less time than it would if it was in a shady environment. But we have yet to have a label that has faded.
Oh,
We have had labels that have been broken. We've had labels where someone stepped on them and it snapped, but the tape was still readable before it got
ah,
passed out. So the Brother label printing system does seem to be very, very long lasting, or at least it has been for us with the transparent labels with the black text. And generally, Brother label printers are not too difficult to get hold of. Our one is one that's wired and connected to a PC. And that means you can then get the software that comes for free with it from Brother, which allows you to have to to type it out on a screen and then print it out, which means you can have different fonts, etc. If your label printer is like a handheld one with a screen, you don't have that option. You can do a certain amount of formatting on that little screen. But so far we found that they both adhere to the label and they stay readable for a very long time. Whether it would last hundreds of years, I don't know. But so far we've had very good luck with it.
I don't think my garden is going to last hundreds of years. It barely lasts from year to year. Um, Somebody asked about plant care information. You could add that to your database as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the good thing about a database is there's no limit to what you can add to it. The better they get, the more useful they become. So ours has this feature whereby you can set up an alert. So you know how you pull up your calendar and I've got a meeting on this day and I have it alert me an hour before that thing needs doing. Well, a lot of modern databases have that ability too. And so in our case, I could say, Buddleia needs to be pruned in spring every year. I can then have it alert me on April 1st every year with a little alert that pops up and says, this plant needs pruning. So they're becoming more and more useful in that they can potentially start to tell you what gardening things to do at what time. Now, of course, they're limited in that they don't go outside, so they don't know that actually it's like the mildest winter we've ever had for years, and that we might end up having to do that pruning a whole month earlier than we would normally do. So again, that's computers for you. But the trouble is, a lot of the databases that botanical gardens use are designed for botanical gardens, and they are very expensive to get a license for, and so they're really beyond the realms of what a regular gardener can afford or have access to. But even without that, regular gardeners have easy access to software like Excel, or even Microsoft Access, which is a databasing system.
Right.
If they're smart with computers, they might be able to set it up the way that they want. But Heronswood began with an Excel spreadsheet. It was just a simple list, and you have as many columns as you want, and the obvious ones like bed and location and date of acquisition, but all the stuff you mentioned about how to care for that plant could be included. Pruning month, um, when to mulch, when to feed, what pests to look out for. All of that stuff could be easily incorporated into a spreadsheet, and then the world is your oyster.
It's we're getting to the end, but one last comment from a gardener uh, about the problems that kind of sympathizing with you for people taking your labels away. She had tagged all of her dahlias, and then they disappeared. The labels, most of them disappeared. But later she found that the birds had taken them and were making them in the nest. So
Well,
we do.
that's a little bit better. At least it wasn't people.
Right. So even backyard gardeners can sympathize with some of the problems that even Heronswood has. Well, thank you so much for your time and for all the guidance on this.